Folks, I think all of you know Mike Mariola, so I'm going to keep my introduction brief. But here's a few important things that you'd be interested to know. That Mike has had a lifelong passion for hospitality, and he was influenced at the earliest of ages by the hearty home-style cooking of his French mother. Mike started in the restaurant business at the age of 14, eventually landing a job as prep cook at the mobile five-star rated Parker's Restaurant and Bistro Bar in Ohio City. Mike was promoted to sous chef before traveling on 2 occasions to serve internships. One under the esteemed French chef Christian Constant at Le Violon d'Ingres in Paris, and another under Chef Michael Richard at Citronelle in Washington, D.C. Mike and his wife, Emily, opened their first restaurant, the South Market Bistro, in the summer of 2002. Although South Market Bistro has since been sold, Mike's restaurant career has continued to grow. Currently, Mike Mariola Restaurants operates 4 high-performing restaurants in Ohio. The restaurants include the City Square Steakhouse, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, in Worcester, as well as the Rail restaurants located in Akron, Strongsville, and Dublin. Mike is an enthusiastic member of the Worcester community and former board chair of Main Street Worcester. He is also actively involved with the Ohio Restaurant Association. Mike and Emily live on a farm in Worcester along with their 4 children. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you Mike Mariola to tell you about operating restaurants during this crazy COVID-19 time. Mike?
Thank you, Dee. I appreciate the invitation to come and tell our story. I guess I would start by saying we are still learning every day how to operate restaurants during the COVID environment, and it seems to change on a daily basis. But I thought maybe the most interesting way to talk about operating restaurants during the COVID environment is to kind of tell our story over the last few months, because I think it'll highlight some of the challenges and then talk about some of the things that we're thinking about going forward. So I'm going to share our screen. As you all probably remember, certainly for the restaurants, the concern with the coronavirus really started in March. I can remember in early March, we were starting to get guidance from the health department around some precautions we needed to be taking. And actually, restaurants are pretty well equipped to handle this type of particular concern. We deal with other risks with things like norovirus that we have to constantly be on alert for, and it's part of our normal practices to clean and sanitize the restaurants anyway. But new procedures were needed to start fighting this coronavirus that we were starting to hear about. And really, the story begins with a text message, and I noted here on the slide that this really was a perfect storm for so many businesses, but probably unprecedented for restaurants and hotels and small music venues and some businesses that were completely shuttered as a result of the crisis as it grew. So I remember on the 15th of March, Sunday the 15th, I got a text from a friend on the Ohio Restaurant Association board saying, "Hey, Governor DeWine is making an announcement tonight. Make sure that you're around." And I just knew by the tone of the text and a quick conversation that something was going to happen, and we didn't know what. So I called Ethan, who's in charge of operations, into the office, and we sat around and listened to the governor's speech. And that's the night that the governor announced that they were going to close down the dining rooms and the bars. We had to put a very quick plan of action together to deal with the result from the dining room closure. And I'm very proud of the fact that we did move incredibly quickly to adjust to what was coming. So the first bullet point there is breathtaking. I mean, imagine any business having their revenue cut by 90+% overnight. It was just something that we were totally unprepared for as an industry. Most people in our country, most businesses were unprepared for the shutdown. I put a note here that it's all about cash flow. And so I'll get into the business of running restaurants a little bit. It really is a cash flow business. We have money coming in, money going out. Most restaurants operate that way without a huge cash reserve. There's actually a lot of restaurant companies that operate without any cash reserve, and they only use a line of credit to bounce back and forth on their accounts payable and payroll. And that's very typical in this industry. It is not an industry that's built to sustain a huge downturn like we saw with the dining rooms being closed. So I was pretty confident we were going to get some kind of help from the government, but who knew when and what it would look like. And so we had to make changes right away to try to manage our cash flow. When we looked at our cash flow a couple of days after the dining room closure and started to do projections, we wanted to understand how long we could survive on current cash, and we did the calculation that for the stores at the time, we were spending about $40,000 a week more than we were making, and so we were going to deplete our cash in a number of weeks, and we knew that without some type of infusion of cash, we were not going to survive. So that was pretty terrifying. But what we did in the meantime is we said, okay, we've got to react to what we can do to generate revenue. We unfortunately had to lay off all our hourly team members, so 225 of our team members were laid off, and we did that, overnight. We canceled all of our orders that were coming in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We called every vendor and said, hey, we don't want anything sent to the stores. We're going to work off our existing inventory. And one of the things we did right away, and you can see on the screen, is a limited menu. So we knew that we probably couldn't operate with a full menu doing just carryout. And we wanted to manage our costs. So we limited our offering, which many restaurants that stayed open did. And that turned out to be a very good decision. So we were able to kind of work through our inventory because we were sitting on inventory that you would use at full occupancy at all of our stores. And there were some innovative things done by the state. I know the Department of Liquor offered for the first time ever a buyback program where you could send back full unopened bottles of liquor and get refunds for them. Our perishable product we couldn't do anything with, so we had to find ways to cook it and sell it as quickly as we could. We kept all of our salaried managers in place to run the carryout operations, and really, with the flip of a switch overnight, transitioned from a full-service dine-in focused restaurant to a carryout curbside and delivery restaurant. And it took us about a week to get delivery set up because we had not been doing delivery for a number of months. So within a week, we had delivery platforms set up with Grubhub and DoorDash, those type of things. And, there was a lot of restaurants trying to do this at the same time. So the lead time, what would have taken a week in pre-COVID times, was all of a sudden taking 2, 3, 4 weeks to get set up. But we did a really good job, stayed focused, and got deliveries up and running, limited menu. We started doing some promotions, which some of you might have taken advantage of. I know one of the most popular were our growler promotions. We were doing $10 growlers, and I see Justin. I know Justin was around for a few of those. So, we were doing some promotions as loss leaders just to get people to come and experience the curbside because they may not have thought of the Rail or City Square Steakhouse as a place they would get carry out, and we had to really get our guests to think differently about how to use us. And what we found is we would run a promotion for a day or two, or maybe the better part of a week, and it would do incredibly well, and then it would fall off. And what we noticed is most of the restaurants that were open for curbside and carry out were doing their own promotions. And so you really had to stay top of mind. So we just started cycling through new ideas every week on what we could do to generate additional revenue. All the while, we're starting to try to build a plan for these 225 team members who have been furloughed because retaining them was important to us. We didn't know if it was going to be, when the shutdown first happened, there was no visibility on when things would reopen as far as dining room. And so we had people in our industry saying 6 to 8 weeks. We had people saying months, and we didn't know what that would look like. So we did take a lot of time and energy to think about retention. A couple of things that we had success with, we offered meals for our team members that had been laid off. They could stop by the restaurant at a certain time every day and get a free meal every day. And if they had family members that needed fed, we provided multiple meals. We had a number of team members that were laid off that had health insurance with our company. And we felt really strongly that we needed to find a way to maintain their health insurance. So we ended up paying for both the employee and the employer portion of the health insurance, partially through deferral with our health insurance company, which was very helpful. So we didn't make the payment initially, but we were able to sustain the plans and then get caught up on them later on. And then we just tried to have really good communication. I sent a number of letters out to our team members explaining to them what we were working on. I thought it was really important for them to know what we were prioritizing, what we were doing to protect the business, and try to point out any opportunities for them to get grants or certainly unemployment, which many of our team members were able to get. Similar to our promotions, we did some fundraising as well. We did some fundraising for the Boys and Girls Club here in Worcester. Anywhere that we could find ways, we did some fundraising for the food banks who were really in need of assistance. One, building goodwill with our communities where we operate, and also, again, just building awareness around this new way that our guests could use our restaurants without being able to come into the dining rooms. Couple other examples of some promotions that we did with quite a bit of success here. We didn't ever get into sort of the grocery, which was popular and still is popular. Even if you go to Panera now, you can see that they have some items that you can purchase almost as a grocery item. We just felt like it moved away from the limited menu, limited inventory plan that we had in place. But we did get into these grill kits, which have been pretty successful. Kind of a fun way to grab all your favorite ingredients from the rail or the steakhouse and take it home and grill. We did that for a number of holidays with good success. And so we're moving into April now, and as the PPP applications started to take off, we were very, very pleased to be working with the local bank. And I think many of you have heard the stories of the struggles with a lot of small businesses who had relationships with large banks. Their ability to process these PPP loan applications was much more complex than working with the local bank. So I can't say enough about the support that we received from Wayne Savings. They were able to get our application in, not the first day, mostly because we waited to make sure we understood the process as best we could. But within a couple of days, we had our application submitted, and April 16th, we received approval on all three applications for the three different companies. So the rail restaurants operate as one company, the Steakhouse is a separate legal entity, and then Mike Mariola Restaurants is a third legal entity, which is our management company. So that was encouraging. The problem is that, as some of you might remember, there was a lot of ambiguity and concern around how the loans could be used, what they could be used for, whether or not you had to use all the loans or a portion of the loans. And up until early June, we really thought we were going to have to return. There was a chance we were going to have to return all the PPP money if the law hadn't been clarified and updated. So thankfully, in early June, they signed the Flexibility Act. And with those simple changes to the law, it allowed us to completely utilize the funds. And we were at the point where we were literally within weeks of being insolvent. And we had this deferred health insurance payments that I talked about. We had a lot of sales tax that we were trying to get caught up on. And so the PPP money for us, for our company, and I've heard this from some friends who own restaurants, was really a saving effort. And without it, we would have had to have some other cash infusion, or we would have had to close up shop. So, but with the PPP money, we were able to keep the doors open and work towards the dining room reopening. So in late May, we heard from the state of Ohio that we were permitted to start reopening dining rooms on the 21st, if you guys remember that. We did take kind of a cautious approach to reopening for a number of reasons. I'll go back to the cash flow conversation. Cash flow is extremely important for restaurants, and we estimated the cost to reopen, depending on the location, anywhere from $75,000 to $120,000 to get the stores reopened. And we've taken a very conservative approach on training and making sure that as these team members who have been out of work for weeks, months, coming back into the workplace and now having to learn some new procedures around safety and sanitization, we had a lot of training that we wanted to do. We had new uniforms that we were buying. We had to restock the inventory of the restaurants, which were completely depleted all the way down to that core limited menu. So it was a very expensive proposition. And so, spreading it out helped from a cash flow perspective. We also have a small team regionally, and we wanted to get around to every store for the training process and make sure that they were up and running and operating. So in the end, I think that proved to be a smart choice. We were able to take our time and really reopen confidently. And our team, we had a number of team members who, let me back up and say, we sent out a survey, hey, to all of our team members, how are you doing? Are you struggling with any crises right now that we can help with? And also, what's your return to work plan? And I would say probably 95% of our team members indicated through the survey in early May that they intended to come back. And even up into the day of training, we heard that their intention was to return to work, do the training, come back to work. However, I can tell you that during the training days, we lost 15 or 20% of our team members. I think some of them came back to work, and then the realization that they were going to have to possibly give up unemployment funds, or that they were going to be putting themselves at risk by working when they may have been home for the prior number of months. It's just a complicated set of circumstances, and we tried to be really judgment-free and understand that everybody approaches this differently. And we tried to make sure that our team knew that their job would be there as long as we had the work for them, that we weren't giving anybody a hard time if they said, I don't feel comfortable coming back. That's everyone's discretion.
So Mike, with the enhanced unemployment of $600 per week, a number of employees were able to take advantage of that, correct?
Yes.
But that being now exhausted at the end of July, have you seen some of those workers who were maybe taking advantage of that, inquiring about employment?
We have seen a few, but I think we're going to see more once the extension is determined and published. I think some people are still waiting to see what that's going to look like. It's been a challenge, I think, especially for team members who are making more money on the unemployment than they were working their normal shifts. So I think we're going to probably know better in 2 or 3 weeks what that looks like. I would say we haven't seen what we're hoping for is we see this influx of people wanting to work. Staffing continues to be a major challenge for us. We are understaffed in almost all of our restaurants, and what that means is we have team members working overtime, which is fine, but from an expense standpoint, it's not. We have incurred a lot of additional expenses, and our revenue continues to be down. So that overtime is just chipping away at our ability to break even. So it's a concern. It's been a concern, and I'm hoping that we do get an influx of people looking to work industry wide in the next month or so, and that will help shore up some of the deficiencies. So short answer to your question is no, we haven't seen that influx yet, but I'm still expecting to see some of it in the next couple weeks. So we followed guidelines from the Ohio Restaurant Association for a responsible restart, responsible reopening. Again, I feel like we've taken sort of an industry-leading approach to the health and safety and sanitization. I think early on there were a number of restaurants, and remember that as the dining rooms were reopening, the numbers looked promising. We had really flattened the curve. We weren't at this position where we've been in the month of July, where we saw a spike again. I think there was a lot of restaurants that just didn't take it as seriously. but we really wanted to take a conservative approach. So we put together processes for distancing the tables and for mask and glove usage. The gloves continue to be a recommendation, but they're not a requirement, and we continue to have our team wearing gloves and changing the gloves with every hand washing. We just feel like the guests, the data that we've seen indicates that the guests feel more comfortable. And so anywhere that we can make the guests feel comfortable, we've really worked to do that. And I think it's paid dividends for our restaurants, which have stayed relatively busy compared to industry numbers that we're seeing. We've gotten, as you can see on the screen now, a lot of really positive feedback from our guests who are noticing the health and safety and sanitization practices. And I think that's helped to encourage repeat business, both in the restaurant and for carry out. So. Justin, you already mentioned this question about staffing. So, I mean, what I would say is we've gone through this period now where the dining rooms got reopened. June was a really strong month for the industry. July, we saw a massive fall off in business industry-wide as the spike in Ohio and the other states took place. And so I would say we are still an industry that's very much in trouble. I think when we started the dining room shutdown, probably in April, we started to see reports of potentially 5% attrition in the industry, meaning restaurants that would close and not reopen. And that number has grown to 10, 20% over the last couple of months of restaurants that are expected to close. And what's interesting is I think early on, in the very beginning of this crisis, it was probably thought that most of the restaurants that would be negatively impacted would be these smaller mom and pop restaurants. And I think what we're seeing now is there are a lot of larger restaurant companies that are also really at risk of survival because of cash flow and debt issues. They maybe have been able to get by with the PPP money, which is now running out for most companies. But if they don't have another influx of capital, they just there are many companies in our industry and in any industry, I guess, but in the restaurant industry, there are certainly large companies that are heavily leveraged, and they're just not going to be able to maintain the debt issues, the debt load. So again, I would say it's all about cash flow moving forward. I'm hopeful that we're going to see some other additional rounds of PPP money at least for the businesses that have had shutdowns and continue to operate with substantial restrictions. And for us, it's just this story that I'm telling is a story about survival. And I think the story is going to continue for the next number of months until we get to a place where we don't have the social distancing, where we have a vaccine. The name of the game is really survive, to survive through and make it to the other end of this crisis. And the restaurants that are able to do that, I think the ones that are going to be able to do that are the ones that really focus on the safety and making the guests feel comfortable. Restaurants have been in the news a lot. I mean, we had the order last Friday, I believe it was, on the 10 o'clock closure for bars and restaurants, the 10 o'clock serving restriction for bars and restaurants to serve alcohol. I think there are a number of us in the industry that feel like we're being unfairly targeted. And I think part of the reason is that restaurants are a social place. And I think that's something that will survive this crisis. People go to restaurants to hang out, to socialize, to be with their friends and family, a place to celebrate. And so it's easy to look at restaurants and what people see as congregation. But I think the reality is the restaurants, and this is most of the industry, the restaurants that are handling the reopening responsibly, it's actually a very, very controlled environment compared to if you look at the other essential services that are out there. If you spend time in grocery stores and the big box stores, hardware stores and so forth, they don't have the ability to control those environments as closely and carefully as restaurants do. We're just set up to do that. So you've got one table that you sit at, that one table is being sanitized. With the new mask mandates, you're not passing anybody on the way in and out of the restaurant that's not wearing a mask. And so it's just a very safe environment. I feel very comfortable continue to operate and keep our guests and our staff safe. But I think that, as restaurants will be a gathering place during COVID, we'll find ways to work work through the challenges. And then once we get on the other side of this crisis, that need for people to be able to go out and socialize and enjoy themselves in a restaurant will be there. And so that's our goal, is really stay positive, find solutions every day to problems that come up every day, and make it through to the other end of this. And like I said in the beginning of after your introduction, Dee, we're learning every day new policies, procedures, new information that help us make decisions and find solutions. And that's really what it's all about, is just day by day figuring out what is it going to take to get to the other side of the crisis and keep our team and our guests safe along the way. So I hope that that's helped paint a little bit of a picture of our industry. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to tell our story, and welcome any questions that you guys have.
I have a couple of questions, Mike. So, do you have to maintain a thinner density, if you will, people density inside the building as opposed to in your outdoor areas, or as long as they're 6 feet, people are 6 feet or whatever apart, or have partitions between them, the densities inside and outside are the same on the patio?
Yeah, the densities are the same inside and outside, which is that 6 foot requirement, and that every guest be seated. So I think if you see some of the bars that have gotten into trouble are where they've started to allow guests to stand, and it's really hard to maintain the social distancing with people that are congregating at a bar. So every guest has to be seated, every group has to be at least 6 feet apart, and that's the same whether you're outside in the open air as it is inside.
Okay. Now, given the change in capacity, therefore, of the guests that you can serve at any time, have you given any thought to setting up tables outside, either on the sidewalk or in the back, where you have kind of almost like a private parking area? And if so, can food and alcoholic beverages be served over there?
That's a great question, and there's not an easy answer. It's actually surprisingly a very complicated answer, and it really depends on every location. So I'll use City Square Steakhouse as an example, and why I love being part of a smaller community. We initially, when we got ready to reopen, we thought, man, we're going to go big, and if we can put a huge tent behind the steakhouse and recapture all the displaced seats from inside, that's something that we really started planning to do. We waited a few weeks, and I'm glad we did, because we wanted to really gauge the demand. And frankly, the demand isn't that strong. There are certainly peak times when we could use additional seating, but we haven't gotten back to the point where we have the same demand as we did pre-COVID. So what we did do, though, as an example, is the state of Ohio has been working. There's complicated laws around how you can serve liquor, beer, wine, any alcoholic beverage with regard to your designated permit, which is very specific to the footprint of your building, typically, or a gated patio. Well, the state understands the need for people to be outside and expand patios to have more outdoor seating. So they've worked to have some loosened restrictions on where you can serve. You still have to go through a permit process, and it's not a free-for-all. But what the process works like this: we have to get 4 approvals in order to be able to serve food and alcohol at a table. The first approval is with the landlord. The second approval is with the city. The third approval is with the health department. And the fourth approval is with the state of Ohio. For the most part, the landlords have not been an issue. The health departments have not been an issue. And the liquor department has probably been the most flexible. The cities are where we're having issues. And some cities have been great, like the city of Worcester, who worked to get us quickly on the design and review board agenda, very quickly, accommodated our application process, and was able to give us approval, because you can't move to step 2 until step 1 is done, or step 3, excuse me. So City of Fair Lawn passed an executive order allowing temporary expansions till the end of the year. I've been working on these patio expansions for since June, since we reopened the dining rooms. Strongsville, I still don't have done. Now, they have come back more recently and loosened some restrictions, but still have to go through a process. And the city of Columbus has been the most restrictive, where they basically have made it impossible to expand your patio, which is counterintuitive because we know from the data that we get from the health department that eating outside is much safer, but they've just been very business unfriendly. I think that the perspective of the city administration is that we don't want businesses, we don't think the businesses should have opened as early as they did, and we don't want to make it easy for them to expand or do a lot of business. So we're just hitting roadblock after roadblock. There's actually been some really interesting articles written on this in the newspaper down in Columbus, and it just got to the point where I said, you know what, we're not going to win this challenge. I'm going to wait and see if somebody overturns this kind of directive from the city, because at this point it's not worth fighting. So that was a long answer to your question, Dee, but it's complicated, and wherever we can expand outside, we've tried to do that. So the Steakhouse now has 4 tables, to use them as the initial example, out on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant. That's something we could not have done pre-COVID without having a gated area and serve guests outside.
That's great. That's great.
Mike, maybe you can talk about Worcester, its rebound in comparison to the other cities or markets that you are in, and how locally has that been in comparison?
That's a great question, and I don't have great data. I wish we had some better data, sharing between the downtown businesses. So I'm going to speak anecdotally, and I can tell you about our numbers. So the Steakhouse continues to be down about 35% in revenue. Keep in mind that our to-go revenue is up substantially from last year. So we're still doing far more to-go curbside business, but our dine-in business is down substantially. A number of factors at play in Worcester. We don't have a highlight opera this year, which at this time of year is a huge challenge. We don't have the St. Paul business. Now, they've reopened recently, but they're still way down because of business travel. We don't have the business dining that is typical for steakhouses. We have some, but far less than we did this time last year. And probably the one thing that hurts the Steakhouse the most is we don't have very many large party groups. So many of you have been in the fireplace room or out on the patio when we've hosted private events, and that business is pretty much gone or substantially reduced right now. That being said, I will say that again, anecdotally, I feel like the downtown has been quieter compared to some of our other markets. If you just look at the general rebound, Strongsville is a good example, which has a lot of traffic because of the shopping and retail that happens near the rail in Strongsville. Very busy, tons of traffic. Also a careful community with, you can kind of sense how the community has responded as the mask mandate came into order, and then what it looked like before the mask mandate. Strongsville was, as a whole, wearing, you saw a lot of masks being worn before the mandate. People seemed to be very cautious, but they were out. They were gonna deal with COVID and manage their way through it. So I haven't seen as robust a rebound in downtown Worcester. It just seems quieter. I don't know if that's because of construction on the square. I don't know if it's because of other businesses that have been slow to reopen. I don't have a good feel for what it is, but I do feel like it's been a softer rebound in downtown. So I know Main Street is working on some music on the square. What the Steakhouse is going to do is try to continue doing some little events. So we had a certified Angus beef chef's dinner a number of weeks ago. It was the fastest selling event that we've ever had at the Steakhouse. It sold out within, I think, 6 hours or 8 hours. We sold 40 seats. Now that we're doing this as a chef's dinner, but it's socially distanced, so we had all the tables spread out on the patio. It was a great success. So I think anything we can do to generate traffic downtown is what we're going to try to do to help with the situation. But I know I can speak for Emily too at the yoga studio. I mean, they really have limited capacity, at Flex Yoga, and it just hurts. You don't have the same number of people coming downtown to dine and to go to yoga and to shop at our stores and to stay at the hotel. You kind of feel it. I do, I should say. I just have felt that. So.
Another question here, Mike. You're active on the Restaurant Association. Any future legislation that you're either tracking or looking to bring on to the state, and your relationship with the governor's office directly?
We are fortunate. I think the organization has done a really good job to communicate with the governor's office. So we actually, when I say we, the Ohio Restaurant Association board, and then a group of other, I'm not personally on the board, but there's a group of other restaurants that are on this call. We have a weekly call with Lieutenant Governor Husted. So that's been very helpful to kind of keep a pulse on what they're concerned about, what they need us as an industry to be working on. As far as legislation, I think we're wanting to start understanding what we can do to plan for fewer restrictions, so that the 10 p.m. I understand the intent around closing bars or limiting alcohol sales after 10 o'clock. Honestly, it doesn't really impact our business, our company, because our restaurants don't do a ton of alcohol after 10 o'clock anyway. So it's a limited issue for us, but it just kills the bars who do most of their business between 10 and 2, So I feel for the bar owners. The issue is when you make a decision like that, in my opinion, and I think what we've seen just anecdotally talking to people in the industry, is those people that want to have a drink at midnight, they're still going to have a drink. They're just going to do it at a house party or at a gathering rather than at a bar. So I don't know that we've really solved anything with that change. So I'm mindful of the industry. The ORA is mindful that any of these type of restrictions just continue to chip away at the ability for our industry to survive the crisis. So that's, when you talk about legislation, it's figuring out how can we operate safely without the restrictions in place. That's, and I know there's a number of suspected bad operators who are going to have to go before the Liquor Commission, I think this week, and have hearings, and they may lose their licenses. That's what we need, is we need the bad operators, the people that are not following the rules, to be held accountable, so that the rest of the good operators can continue to operate. And I think that's the big push, in addition to trying to get some more help from the federal government on the PPP loans or any other kinds of grants or funding through the SBA that can help with the cash flow situation.
Dee, do you have any more questions?
I don't. Mike, this was great to hear from you, very informative, and thank you very much for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dee. I again appreciate being able to tell the story, and I want to say thank you to all of our fans out there and supporters of the industry who have been out, buying to-go food from the restaurants, not just ours, but across the industry. That's my one big ask from everybody, is continue to support your restaurants. If you don't feel comfortable dining in, consider a carryout from your favorite restaurant, because we really need the business, and we want to be here on the other end of this crisis to welcome everybody back in. So thank you for all the support that we've seen along the way. We very much appreciate it.